Hi there. My name is Yellow Panda. I decided to make a channel that discusses ultra scientific and cool topics like dinosaurs, prehistoric creatures, hypothetical evolutionary scenarios, stuff like that. It's going to be very cool and whatnot. So, hello. Today we will be talking about a type of prehistoric animal you probably never heard about, the dinosaurs. There are a lot of dinosaurs out there. There's the small dinosaur, there's the big dinosaur, there's the one with big teeth, the one with the big nose, the one with the big fingies, the one with the big dick, but you probably know the ones with the big ass neck. These are of course the sauropods. Now, before I go too in-depth in dinosaur science or whatnot, I should clarify that this channel is expecting to attract two different kinds of audiences. The one that is extremely updated and knowledge on the accuracy and scientific discoveries that are made about prehistoric life every day, and the one whose first piece of media that they think of when they hear the word dinosaur is probably the Flintstones. For those who have a very shallow understanding of dinosaur-based ecosystems, imagine you are a kid who has to draw a landscape with dinosaurs. With crayons. What dinosaurs will you fill your picture with? You got your fancy ceratopsid, your tyrannosaur, your hadrosaur, maybe an ankylosaur, and God forbid, the funny long-necked sauropod. You would be surprised that, for the most part, this type of dinosaur faunal configuration didn't really exist. You may be familiar with Tyrannosaurus rex living alongside Triceratops, and that is true, they did live together, more specifically in North America. But ceratopsids are pretty much a thing only found in this continent, apart from the Chinese Sinoceratops, which is the only known example found elsewhere. Ceratopsids are also a relatively recently evolved group of dinosaurs, having of course originated in North America during the late Cretaceous, more specifically in the last 15 million years or so of the Cretaceous period. Tyrannosaurids and hadrosaurids likely also evolved exclusively in this continent too, during the last 20 to 15 million years of the Cretaceous period. So these very traditional groups of dinosaurs are actually a very recent and isolated product of North America's unique biogeography. And maybe you would be surprised that for the most part of North America's last few million years, there were no longnecks, no sauropods to be seen, with one cryptic exception, the Alamosaurus. So this brings us to the title of this episode. So Alamosaurus existed from 70 to 66 million years ago in North America. So it was the last sauropod to exist in North America before the rock crashed into Earth just to kill the dinosaurs. This happened 66 million years ago, by the way. Before Alamosaurus, there are no sauropods in North America for millions of years. The last one before that was likely Sonorosaurus, dating to between 112 and 93 million years ago. So we are talking about a gap of nearly 25 million years where an entire continent filled with dinosaurs was completely devoid of perhaps the most emblematic form of all. This phenomenon is called the sauropod hiatus. To help us explain a little bit as to why this is important and how can we solve this mystery, I feel like it's worth making you go through a crash course of sauropod taxonomy. Unlike tyrannosaurids, hadrosaurids, and ceratopsids, each are their own distinct family of dinosaurs, sauropods is an entire group, and they were much more long-lasting than these three families combined. You may know the Mesozoic, or the age of the dinosaurs, was divided into Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. The Triassic was when dinosaurs first evolved, and sauropods themselves evolved in the late Triassic, so they're a very ancient herbivorous dinosaur design. As the Jurassic came to be, sauropods perfected their design and became the largest things ever to walk the Earth, and many families of sauropods existed back then. You got the Diplodocids, which include all-time famous dudes like Diplodocus and Brontosaurus. We got the Mamenchisaurids, which had ridiculously long necks for the size of their body. We got the Brachiosaurids, which of course includes the famous Brachiosaurus and others. As the Cretaceous evolves, many of these Jurassic families persist, especially throughout the early Cretaceous. But then things start to change as a new group of sauropods arrives in the Cretaceous, the Titanosaurs. The Titanosaurs, as the name suggests, could be titanic. Some were perhaps some of the largest animals to have ever lived, but there were also some really small species. Titanosaurs were very diverse, but they were also the last sauropods left around, as all the older and more basal lineages died off, even though there are undescribed material from the last stage of the Cretaceous that could belong to indeterminate non-titanosaur sauropods. A massive decline in sauropod diversity could, and probably would, explain in part the reason why sauropods vanished one day in North America. But titanosaurs themselves were pretty much cosmopolitan. They were found pretty much everywhere else in the globe, in Europe, Asia, Africa, Madagascar, India, Australia, and even Antarctica and New Zealand. South America was their greatest point of diversity, and so close to North America. Alamosaurus was found in North America, but it was also one of the last sauropods in existence, and yet it is also the only known titanosaur to have ever lived in the continent. So that is strange. Titanosaurs did originate in the Cretaceous period, but they were pretty much widespread even before other sauropods disappeared in North America. They have replaced other sauropods nearly everywhere in the globe, yet when these other sauropods disappear in North America, no titanosaurs are there to replace them, implying these older North American sauropods died because of something else. We can take a look to the last sauropods to live before the start of this sauropod hiatus. Sonorosaurus wasn't a titanosaur, it was a brachiosaurid. Brachiosaurids were apparently very abundant in North America during the later parts of the early Cretaceous period, and in the early parts of the late Cretaceous period, such as the Bidosaurus and Venenosaurus. Holy shit, they named the dinosaur after the hit 2018 film Venom? That's sick! You know what's a more sick name? It's Sauropods protelis, a massive sauropod that was once believed to be a brachiosaurid, but it was found out that it was actually closer to titanosaurs within the Somphospondyli clade, but it was not an ancestor of titanosaurs though, as titanosaurs themselves have already evolved by that time. Sauroposeidon means lizard earthquake god. What a metal name. But the specific name Protelis means in Greek perfected before the end, as a reference to how this was among the last sauropods in North America before the start of the hiatus. Of course, Sauroposeidon actually lived 112 million years ago, and Sonorosaurus actually lasted nearly 20 million years after that, so the meaning kinda goes away with that. But anyway, with this, we can very much conclude that North America had the unique sauropod fauna one day that vanished, and for about 25 million years, many unique dinosaurs evolved in their absence, until a completely new breed of sauropods arrived in the continent, the Alamosaurus. So there are two different questions to be answered with this. Why did sauropods disappear in the continent in the first place, and how did Alamosaurus get to the continent in the first place? None have two clear-cut answers to be given, but we can make educated guesses. Let's start by answering the last one, but before that we can take a look at three different explanations for the hiatus. The first hypothesis goes that sauropods did disappear one day, and that Alamosaurus came from Asia, as North America was connected with Asia throughout most of the late Cretaceous period. That's why famous groups of North American dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurids, Hadrosaurids, and Ceratopsids are also found in Asia. Asia also had an abundant diversity of titanosaurs, so that makes sense. The second hypothesis is similar to the first, but it states that Alamosaurus came from South America instead. It would also make sense given the geographical proximity of the two continents, but these two continents were not connected with each other, they were separated by ocean, yet South America had the greatest diversity of titanosaurs in the world, and Alamosaurus is only known from the southern parts of the North American continent, so it could make sense. A final hypothesis is that sauropods never really disappeared from the continent, and that instead they are not found in the fossil record because they favored upland environments that are less appropriate for fossilization, so the hiatus may not even exist. This theory may not appear to make sense, but we will entertain this one later. So, perhaps the most logical conclusion is to try to understand what is the closest known relative of Alamosaurus. There are nearly 120 species of titanosaurs known from the fossil record, so the sample size should be large enough to help us narrow down which would be this dinosaur's closest relative. But as it turns out, it's not that simple. In fact, it's just a mess. Dinosaur taxonomists shiver at the prospect of a consistent titanosaur family tree, because there's pretty much very little to go around, even with the amount of material we have on our hands. My suspicion is that this might be because there are few skull material preserved from titanosaurs, with only a few good examples found here and there, and many paleontologists infer taxonomic relationships by looking at skull similarities, instead of looking at the rest of the skeleton. Call it a flaw if you want, but regardless of that, it's a mess. Ultimately, Alamosaurus' closest relatives are very hard to narrow down because different alternatives have been offered. Alamosaurus has been argued to be related to the Saltosaurinians of South America, like Saltosaurus and Euquensaurus, which are actually rather small titanosaurs in comparison to the enormous behemothic size of Alamosaurus, but anyway. Alamosaurus has also been placed in proximity with Trigonosaurus from South America and Lyrinosaurus from Spain, sometimes placed as a relative of Ichthyosaurus from India and the Asian Opisthothelicoidea, other times with the South American Antarctosaurus and the giant Argentinosaurus. You would never guess where this guy comes from. It has even been suggested to be related to the Australian Savannahsaurus and Diamantinosaurus, sometimes with the South American Boreotitan, other times with Chinese Jiangshanosaurus. There is no satisfying conclusion when several options are delivered to you. They all come from nearly every part of the globe. It should be noted that, sometimes curiously frequently, Alamosaurus is grouped with Opisthothelicoidea, to the point that a family known as Opisthothelicoidenae was erected to include both of these sauropods. Many Opisthothelicoidins have been recovered from Asia, which would suggest an Asian origin, though sometimes Pellegrinisaurus from South America is placed in that group, another potential relative of Alamosaurus, so this doesn't have to imply that Alamosaurus is Asian in origin. At this point we realize that trying to narrow down Alamosaurus' relationships with other titanosaurs is not working in our favor, so we'll have to test the likelihood of two of our most likely hypotheses. So considering that Alamosaurus has probable relatives in both Asia and South America, both provide good candidates for its origins. So let's start with Asia. Alamosaurus could be an Asian relative of Opisthothelicoidea, potentially. Both were large titanosaurs from the northern hemisphere that were adapted for a very similar dinosaurian fauna, including Tyrannosaurids, Ankylosaurids, and Hadrosaurids. This implies that Asia and North America would be having interchanges very frequently throughout the late Cretaceous. Even some specific genera of late Cretaceous dinosaurs were found in both continents, like the Hadrosaurids Sauropods. These dinosaurs would have made the cross through Beringia, which is the land bridge that joined eastern Siberia with Alaska, but it's believed that sauropods would actually have trouble crossing this bridge for a series of reasons. For one, it was chilly. It was Alaska, and even back then it was cold. Not as cold as today, but still cold. Studies on sauropod geographical distribution has been tentatively favoring the idea that sauropods try to avoid cold climates, so their distribution in very northern latitudes is often reduced or absent. Given the wide range of sauropod distribution in both space and time, we are bound to see exceptions, but there is some logic to this. Sauropods would appear unfit for surviving the cold, as they wouldn't really have any feathered skin. However, many dinosaurs from cold environments like Hadrosaurs, Ceratopsians, Tyrannosaurids, and Ankylosaurids were also scaly, and because these were also large dinosaurs, they could generate enough metabolic heat to endure cold temperatures. However, their babies might not, necessarily, being small and vulnerable. They could also suffer from the cold. But we also have evidence of dinosaurs breeding in cold conditions in late Cretaceous Alaska, so we are looking at a scenario where large scaly dinosaurs could surely survive in easy circumstances in the cold, so sauropods don't seem to me like unfitting examples. Beringia has been argued to be a very mountainous region back then, however, so that could be a bigger barrier against sauropods. But even still, that seems a bit unfair because they could make the cross through the coast or through valleys and whatnot. What I feel is the final nail in the coffin for the Asian origin theory is that there is no known sauropod fossils from northern North America, and this would appear like a small deal because fossils don't really have to preserve all the time, but when we look at the influence and abundance of Alamosaurus in the south, as well as the pristine ecological picture that we can paint for many excellent fossiliferous sites across the rest of the continent, it would appear very unlikely that sauropods would be hiding in plain sight in northern North America, with all other dinosaurs from there being preserved in great condition, and in the south the sauropods are just conveniently abundant as fossils. Sauropods were massive ecosystem engineers that would have influenced the rest of the ecosystem, so they should be abundant everywhere they were. If Triceratops lived with sauropods, we would probably know, but that wasn't the case most likely. So with this means that sauropods crossing from Asia to the south of North America seems unlikely given we haven't really found any sauropod fossils from northern North America fossil sites that otherwise preserve many other rich dinosaurian assemblages. And it seems unlikely that they wouldn't have settled in the ecosystems that kept both habitats without us knowing. This surprisingly clears out what would appear like the likeliest possibility, that sauropods got to North America by walking. So we are now left with another strange option, the possibility that sauropods got to North America by swimming. So let's test this idea. So Alamosaurus is often argued to be related to many South American titanosaurs too, like Pellegrinisaurus, Trigonosaurus, Borutitan, etc. But South America was separated from North America by ocean back then, unlike Asia. Basically the opposite of what's going on today. This may appear surprising, but there is also an interesting bit of evidence that dinosaurs would have actually been interchanging between North and South America during the late Cretaceous, quite often. Both North and South America as Hadrosauroids and Ankylosaurs, and they might have all arrived from North America to South America at the same time, about 85 million years ago or something. Hadrosaurids, specifically from the Austrocretosaur group, arrived to the southern continent fairly early, and through much of the late Cretaceous, they incorporate a relevant amount of herbivores in the continent, alongside the native titanosaurs. A relative of Hadrosaurids, Gonkoken, was described this year in Chile, indicating that basal relatives of Hadrosaurids also made the cross to the southern continent. Patagopelta was described last year, and this small ankylosaur is believed to be a member of the Nodosauridae family, and that its closest relatives may even actually be North American ankylosaurs from the late Cretaceous, leading these North American ankylosaurs to coexist with the native South American ones, the so-called para-ankylosaurs. This indicates that the North to South American crossing occurred among a few lineages of herbivorous dinosaurs at about 85 million years ago, perhaps through an island chain that formed in between the continents, shortening the oceanic travels needed to make the cross. It could be feasible to imagine that sauropods made that cross from South to North America at that time. Unfortunately, they only show up about 15 million years after that, so you can't really correlate both events. What this does tell us is that they could make the cross between the two continents, probably because of a close proximity between them. Now, this still means that these dinosaurs would have to cross large portions of ocean regardless. But sauropods were not very dense animals, having heavily pneumatized air-filled bones across most of their skeleton. So despite their enormous mass, they could have actually been able to float while swimming in the water. Their large size also means they would be able to sustain long periods of time without food or water until they reached a suitable environment for them to establish. This may sound insane, but after many millions of years of trial and error, you would just need one instance where things go right to kickstart a whole new chapter of evolution. The fact that herbivores were the ones to make the cross between the two continents instead of the carnivorous dinosaurs makes sense considering large herbivores are formatted across large portions of territory to find new opportunities of foraging, and for giant sauropods, which need massive quantities of food, crossing a short portion of ocean to reach promising new lands seems pretty plausible. I can only imagine what was it like for native North American dinosaurs to chill out on the beach and just see towering Cthulhu-esque titans coming out of the water and taking this new land as theirs. "They're invading our country," said the T-Rex before the Alamosaurs put forth their coup d'etat. So, surprisingly, this explains why Alamosaurus only exists in southern North America, and why it appears all of the sudden as well. It just came from a group of South American titanosaurs that got lucky in their oceanic travels for new neighboring lands, instead finding a land that has been absent from their kind for nearly 25 million years. And why is that, do you think? Sauropods did exist in North America before, but what happened? Why did they left? Well, there are a few theories. One of them suggests the idea that North American sauropods competed with new North American herbivorous dinosaurs. After all, the late Cretaceous saw the birth of very new groups such as Hadrosaurids and Ceratopsids, which dominated North America, so them being outcompeted by them would make sense. Except not really, because sauropods coexist just fine with those types of dinosaurs in other localities of the globe. Another option is potential floral overhauls. That is, plants evolved, and given sauropods were herbivores, they couldn't adapt to the new plants. Flowering plants, or angiosperms, were becoming more dominant and overturning earlier forms of plants, the so-called seed ferns and the gymnosperm trees, the group that includes ginkgos, conifers, and whatnot, becoming the most dominant form of flora. Earlier sauropod groups would have less adaptations to deal with these changes, but titanosaurs wouldn't, which would lead to a decline in non-titanosaur sauropods globally. This theory has some issues, mainly because Titanosaur dentition is not amazingly distinct from other sauropods, but this shift towards a new type of plant domination is an enticing explanation, as new herbivorous dinosaurs did evolve anyway around this time, suggesting new adaptations to new diets. But there is a final, and personally more likely hypothesis. Sauropods went extinct in North America because of mass extinction events. We all know the age of the dinosaurs ended with a huge mass extinction that, in broad strokes, killed every dinosaur that wasn't a bird. But throughout the 185 million year history of the Mesozoic era, smaller extinction events did occur that motivated evolutionary changes in many groups of animals throughout that time, including dinosaurs. The last North American sauropod before Alamosaurus disappeared about 93 million years ago at the end of the Cenomanian stage. And wouldn't you know it, at the end of the Cenomanian, there was a global extinction event, the so-called Cenomanian-Turonian boundary event. This event was the last and perhaps most severe truly global oceanic anoxic event of the last 150 million years, discounting perhaps the one that occurred during the asteroid impact 66 million years ago. A global oceanic anoxic event is, in essence, a situation where the oxygen content of the oceans at a global scale drops a lot, killing off many oceanic creatures. This may appear inconsequential given sauropods were not marine animals, but what causes this drop in oceanic oxygen could have affected them. We are talking about a massive climatic change event. The boundary is characterized for being one of the hottest points in the last 500 million years of Earth's history, with very high carbon dioxide concentrations, easily exceeding modern-day levels. It's likely this rise in temperature and hothouse conditions would have occurred due to massive volcanic eruptions, and many large igneous provinces are great candidates for that cause, such as the Ontong Java, currently located under the Pacific Ocean, or the Caribbean Large Igneous Province, also known as CLIP, which appears dangerously close to North America. But it is possible that multiple large igneous provinces were pumping carbon dioxide, eating the planet at the same time. This would cause the oceans to become acidic, and weather would be shifting around and changing globally. Now, granted, the major extinctions that occurred around this time are recorded in the ocean, with many species of invertebrates, but even very well-known groups of marine reptiles, like the ichthyosaurs, going extinct entirely. But even on land, the effect is felt. Spinosaurids, for instance, might have gone extinct by this time. Brachiosaurids went extinct by this time too, and as I mentioned, they were the main composers of the North American sauropod fauna. Large climatic changes like these would easily have effects on habitat and weather patterns that would affect large dinosaurs with very large resource requirements, and extinction because of that appears plausible. Now, of course this could affect sauropods at a wider scale, but different groups of sauropods could be more adaptable than others, and just because in one continent they got unlucky doesn't mean that would reflect in other continents. So there you have it, folks, a full explanation on how sauropods disappeared in North America, only to be repopulated just before it all went to shit. And because there are really no sauropod fossils from that 25 million year gap, we are pretty confident that the third hypothesis that they were just hiding somewhere is kind of unlikely, as fossil formations across the continent are very detailed in what kinds of animals they preserve. So, wait, what do you mean? I'm in the middle of recording, Gary, you can't... I'll be damned. Okay guys, everything I just said might be wrong. So, apparently there is a fossil attributed to a sauropod from the Milk River Formation of Canada, dating back to some 84 to 83 million years ago. That puts it less than 10 million years after the start of the hiatus and nearly 15 million years before its end. So we have a North American sauropod right in the middle of the hiatus? This doesn't make any sense. It appears to be a member of the Lithostrotia clade, which is a name attributed to derived titanosaurs, which includes Alamosaurus. And its position in Canada does kinda mean that they were around in northern North America. Now, it should be noted the fossil does not have a species assigned to it. It's said to be a tail vertebra, and it's not even complete, so take it with a grain of salt. But if this fossil is to be taken seriously, then we have a few different implications at hand. One is that it might actually prove the theory that the hiatus did not exist, or at least partially, and that titanosaurs were indeed present in northern North America, suggesting they might have made their way to Asia. So we have a North American titanosaur, perhaps similar to Alamosaurus, living nearly 15 million years before it. And why would they show up at this point in time and remain invisible from the fossil record until 15 million years after? I don't know, this is blowing my mind, but I do have a few solutions to explain this. An easy solution for this is that there is a chance this might not even be a sauropod fossil. It's the centrum of a tail vertebra. I don't even have access to pictures of this fossil, but it's legit. This information comes from the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology. I just can't access it myself, so I have to make my guesses on this. My guess is that it's not a sauropod bone. Not because I believe the ones who described it as a sauropod bone were capping, just that the remains were too fragmentary to be interpreted with such confidence. Especially considering the tail vertebrae of sauropods can sometimes be confused with the neck vertebrae of hadrosaurids if seen in a different orientation. This is not me saying it, this is something I read, and it's perfectly feasible that it doesn't apply to this case, but it would be my guess, and I think this fossil was misinterpreted as a sauropod fossil, and it's in fact something else. But I can't just shake the idea about the possibility of this being actually sauropod bone. So what if it is? My best take to explain it is that it probably would be an ancient lineage of titanosaurs that made it to North America. Though it is not implausible that it comes from South America too, given the timing would very neatly coincide with the migration of hadrosaurs from North to South America. But my guess is that this was a singular, isolated colonization event by sauropods that for some odd reason didn't last and they eventually disappeared shortly after establishment. That would be my best explanation, and it would be, personally to me, very strange that ancestors of Alamosaurus were kicking in North America for nearly 15 million years without being noticed. But hey, life is full of surprises, so who knows. So anyway, here's my coverage of this very specific topic that I see very few people mentioning or talking about, and I hope it illustrates what I aim to speak about in this channel. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it, and I really wish you to stick around and stay tuned on this channel to see more interesting stuff I do. I hope this format was pleasing and enticing, and I'll see you at a future moment, speaking about something else that is cool. Keep it up.